Thank you. And we are blessed with this music, this day, this celebration. Thank you to all our musicians here. We've come together from many different places, and we're at different stages in our journey through life. But one way in which our paths have varied today, because of one thing we have in common, and that is at one point or another, and to some degree or other, our lives have touched the life of Lackey Rowe. And so we've turned aside from our custom ways and gathered here to give expression to the thoughts and the feelings that arise in us at this time of loss and completion. Let's be honest with death. Let's not pretend it is less than it is. It is separation, it is sorrow, it is grief. But neither let us pretend that it is more than it is. It's not annihilation. As long as memory endures, his influence will be felt. It's not an end to love. Humanity's need for love from each of us is boundless. It's not an end to joy and laughter. Nothing would less honor a vital soul like his than to make our lives drab. Let us be honest with death, for in that honesty, we will understand life better and ourselves more deeply. And even in saying this, it's for us to realize that death has not brought us here today. Life has. It's not given to us to know much about death, nor do I think we really want to. It's a fact of life. And while that fact is inescapable, our consciousness, our awareness, is always oriented towards life. We didn't come here because a person has died, but because he and we shared life. Now, while that fact is inescapable, our consciousness, our awareness, is indeed always oriented towards life. We are here to celebrate Lackey's life, to consecrate the memories and the meanings that are part of you because of him, and in so doing, proclaim the glory of life itself, even in the face of loss. And a lot of that's going to be through music today, too. It's also for us to realize there's no such thing as life in general, only life in particular, as we're reminded so competently by death today. Life in particular today means an individual so unique that from the world's multitudes we cannot replace him. And while the loss of his uniqueness may be a cause of grief and sorrow now, it's also a cause of greater joy for all that he's brought to our lives in the many ways in which he enriched us. I invite you into the spirit of the music of this time and entering into this service together. You may remain seated as we sing hymn number 11, Peace Like a River, and the words will be on the screen. Like a river. I invite Mike to come forward to share the words from Bob Joyce.
So Bob couldn't be here today, but I'm going to read his words for you. So, my name is Bob Joyce, and I dare say I had known Lackey longer than anyone in this room. He and I were thrown together as freshman roommates at Ole Miss in 1958. Can anybody beat that? I didn't think so. We immediately bonded as close friends and roomed together for the next 3 years until I was married in 1961. Lackey played a great role in my getting married, and while it separated us as roommates, it strengthened his friendship not only with me but also with my new wife. Were it not for Lackey, my wife and I might not now be celebrating our 65th anniversary together. You see, Betty Ann Reefers arrived on the Old Miss campus in June 1960, and I happened to see her in passing a short time later. I was so smitten I determined to find out who she was and get a date. I pointed her out to Lackey, and while he said, "This is going to be tough, she's awful good looking, son." He joined in the search enthusiastically. It was almost a month later when he came back to the dorm with a big grin on his face and said, "Well, I know her name now. At least her first name and her first initial." He had been behind her in the line at the cafeteria, and you know how short of stature, tippy-toe over, and he caught her name, Betty, but he couldn't read her last name. He knew her last initial was R, but her hand was over her last name. Being a former military intelligence operative, I was a Russian translator in the U.S. Air Force Intelligence in England for almost 3 years before returning to Ole Miss. I had learned a few sneaky tricks that proved to be handy. I called the campus directory and told the student who answered that I had found a rain-soaked textbook and would like to get it back to the student in question. I could read that it was Betty R., but the rest was a mess. I couldn't make any sense of it. So I asked the kid on the phone to search the R's and see if he could find Betty. Sure enough, he found her and told me what dorm she lived in. Now, if I did this today, I'm sure I'd be in jail convicting of stalking, but in 1960, it didn't cause a ripple. Try as I may, though, Betty Reefers would not go on a date simply because she did not know me. My pleas went on for the rest of the summer until fall semester began, and I had a friend who knew her dorm manager well. The friend asked the dorm manager to talk to Betty and convince her that I was not the scoundrel that I appeared to be and she should go out with me. It worked, and she agreed to go to dinner. We spent 4 hours together over that dinner and closed down the restaurant, after which I was even more smitten. Maybe she was too, because when I took her back to the dorm, I asked if she'd like to have lunch together the next day, and she immediately said yes. We were inseparable afterwards and were married a year later with Lackey in our wedding. Betty and Lackey became friends the minute they were introduced, and Lackey did everything he could to ensure that we stayed together. We ran around together on campus, and when Betty and I had a date that needed a car, he pressed his quirky Renault Dauphine on us. That just sounds quirky, doesn't it? I say quirky because the car's starter often failed, and we would have to find a convenient hill to park on so we could roll start it. And if that would fail, sometimes we would use the crank included with the car to start it manually. That car provided a lot of laughs for all of us, Lackey included, and Betty's good humor through it all cemented our relationship all the more. After we all graduated, Lackey went off to the Philippines with the Peace Corps, and Betty and I went to Western North Carolina. When he returned, he entered law school at Ole Miss, graduated, and was admitted to the bar. He went to Jackson at the height of the segregationist movement and did pro bono legal work for the activists that were attracted by the movement. It also attracted some of the finest lawyers in the country, and Lackey told me he was privileged to have had such fine legal minds on his team as he went to court. It was certainly a highlight of his life. We stayed in touch through the years, and Lackey and his family visited while we were in North Carolina. We were both enthusiastic hikers, and whenever together we sought out new trails to try. Our favorites were in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. He's got some photographs that I'm not going to hold up, but you can see them later, of both of them years ago in beautiful surroundings. We got together often when Lackey was in Memphis, and less often when we were both in places like Minneapolis. But the bond was always there when we could resume a conversation as easily as if it had just ended the day before. Betty and I were happy when Lackey found Jean, for it was obvious they were meant to be together. Jean's my mom, by the way. And we were even more pleased when they decided to move to Brevard. By then, we were living in Knoxville, and it made it easy to meet for long lunches and conversations, often in places like Waynesville, the Mount Pisgah Inn, or even in Brevard. Some of our lunches were in Lackey's last months at the restaurant at Bush Bean's headquarters near Newport. Lackey was an unusual man, a man full of empathy for his fellow human beings, regardless of their color or station in life. He fought for their justice, for their right to live their lives as others lived theirs. He believed in truth and campaigned all his life for truth and compassion in politics, and he was a loyal friend. He was our friend, and Betty and I will miss him immensely. Rest in peace, Lackey Rowe.
My name is Ransom Jones, and I had the great fortune of knowing Lackey Rowe for a period of 60 years. We graduated from law school together in August of 1966. We started law school together in June of 1964. And when we graduated from law school, Lackey went to work for a group called Lawyers Committee for Constitutional Rights Under Law. In Mississippi, working for that group, he took his life in his hands by doing it. The group was a group of lawyers that come in from out of state and fought for the rights of minorities in this state. And Lackey, being a member of the Mississippi Bar, was important to the organization because they couldn't practice law in Mississippi without a Mississippi lawyer helping them out or associating on the case. And Lackey did that, and he did it for a couple of years, and then he moved up to Tennessee. But I want to tell you my personal experience with Lackey when we was in law school. Lackey introduced me to a lot of things, and he had a great love for music. He loved jazz, he loved rock and roll, and he loved folk music. And he introduced me to some of the jazz musicians. He introduced me to the Supremes. He liked to hear them sing. And he introduced me to people like, he didn't introduce me to the people, but the music these people sang. You know, Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul, and Mary, and some of those people uh, who sang these folk songs. And Lackey had a love for all kinds of music. But Lackey was more than that. He was a human being who was extremely brilliant, and he believed in people. He never lost his faith in people. And in the Constitution of the United States, Lackey actually read it, and he believed in the words in that document, and that all people, any person is entitled to equal protection and due process of law. And it doesn't matter what color you are, what religion you are, what faith you are, or anything else. The fact that you were a person under our Constitution says that you're entitled to equal protection and due process of law. And Lackey stood for those principles. He was the most tolerant person I ever knew. It didn't make any difference what your views were. Lackey would listen to what you had to say and be tolerant of the position that you took. Now, Lackey was not only devoted to making a huge contribution while he was in this life, after he left this life, he also felt like he had a duty to make some contribution to solve problems for people in the future. So when Lackey died, he had donated his body to medical science. So even in death, Lackey kept giving to humanity. And I have the greatest admiration for this man because he was such a tolerant and decent person. And he was one of the most brilliant people I ever met. Lackey had one little problem, and that was his mind worked so fast that his mouth could not keep up with what he was trying to say. But if you listen to him and you listen carefully to what he had to say, you would understand that what he was saying was an effort to teach you how to be compassionate toward other people. I will miss him for the rest of my life. It was one of the most valuable friendships I've ever had. And not only was Lackey a good friend, I actually loved him like he was family. The last time we spent any real time together was in the election between Biden and Trump. He and Gene come down to my house and spent a week. We watched the election results that night and drank a little wine celebrating the fact that Biden had defeated Trump in the election. And of course, Lackey uh, was very liberal in his political views, and he's been that way ever since I've known him. There was four of us in law school that had those views, and it was almost an intolerable situation for us in Mississippi in 1964, 65, and 66 to hold those kind of views. Uh, I cannot, in this little short piece, say enough about him. because he was a very complex man. And I appreciate the opportunity and honor of having the opportunity to speak a memorial to Lackey Rowe. Thank you for listening.
If I were free to speak my mind, I'll tell a tale to all mankind of how the flowers do bloom and fade, of how we fought and how we paid. This weary world has had its fill of words of war on every hill. The time has come for peaceful days and peaceful men with peaceful ways. If I were free to speak my mind, I'd tell a tale to all mankind of how the flowers do bloom and fade, of how we fought and how we paid. When all when all mankind has ceased to fight, I'll raise my hands in thanks each night for the stranger and all it brings of golden days and peaceful dreams. If I were free to speak my mind, I'd tell a tale to all mankind of how the flowers do bloom and fade, of how we fought and how we paid.
First, it's a real pleasure to be back with this group again after so long and to be singing again. For almost 20 years, we've known Gene and Lackey since they first came to Brevard, and as time has gone on, we've become closer and closer, and I'll talk about that a little more in just a minute. They've actually become part of our extended family, and we feel that they're among a handful of people that we've known all our lives that we feel closest to. Met Gene and Lackey sometime around December 5th, or December '05, We were in the later stages of remodeling this space. For those of you who may not know, this was actually the gas company. It was built in, the building was built in 1985, 86, and we took it over in 2004. And where those windows are, there were actually a big overhead door, and this was a concrete floor, and it was painted. This is where they maintained their trucks. And this was a all concrete block around here. It was a popcorn ceiling with 16-foot fluorescent lights and no windows and no light in here at all except artificial light. So I've been remodeling houses all my life. That was my second job after teaching high school English. And so I took over the leading this remodel, and we did it mostly all with volunteers except for the electrical work. And we were almost finished, and I was right down there in the corner installing baseboard. And Gene and Lackey walked through that door back there and came over and introduced themselves. And we got to talking, and they saw what I was doing, and they had just bought a house on Country Club Road, which they wanted to make some changes to. Well, we made some changes. So I took that job on, and we started in late December and finished, I think, sometime in April. We spent every day together, all day long, and we talked a lot. And Jean, being a retired UU minister, I was very interested in talking to her about religion and about UUTC, and we were both very involved with UUTC. And Lackey and I talked about just about everything else. Lackey was a special person, and I think you saw in the other two tributes to him that I'm going to repeat some of the things that they said. He was smart, he was interesting, and he was unique. He really was. We're all unique in our own ways, but Lackey was truly unique and a special person, one of those people that you're lucky if you come across one or two times in your life. He was down to earth. He had strong beliefs and values. He was outspoken. You never were in doubt about where Lackey stood on anything. He had a deep commitment to justice, especially social justice. He had a great sense of humor, and he was a great storyteller. And Lackey and I grew up in two different places. He grew up in the Deep South. I grew up in the North. I was born in Chicago, raised in Chicago and Western New York, where I taught. And in the Air Force, I met a lot of guys from the South, but never really got to know them or talk to them about their lives very much. But I did Lackey. And Lackey told all kinds of great stories about growing up in Memphis and in that area. And one of them was about his grandmother, his father's mother, and her name was Beulah Koo, but Lackey called her Mammy Koo. And she was a character. She ran a little convenience store for in a rural area for most of her clientele was poor black people. And Mammy often extended credit to them when they couldn't pay. But there came a time when it was time for them to pay up. And sometimes they didn't have the money. So Mammy Koo would look across the counter, and there was a single light bulb dangling on a cord above the counter. And she'd look them in the eye and she'd say, you know, Mammy Koo has the power. And they'd look at her and she'd say, when I hit this counter, that light's going to come on. The light came on. And she got paid. All of those treats are special, but there was so much more. As you know, as you heard, Lackey was a civil rights lawyer during the height of the civil rights struggle through the middle 60s. I was in New York in college at that time, and I read about it, and I sympathized with it, but all I knew was what I read in the papers and saw on television. Lackey lived it. And to do what he did in the heart of Mississippi during that time to stand up for black people took an incredible amount of courage. and also a lot of knowledge. And Lackey told some great stories about that. Actually, he stood in this pulpit one time and told some stories about his experiences in the courtroom. So I really not only appreciated what he told me, but I admired him and really held him in a state of awe in some ways for what he had done. Lackey joined the Marine Corps when he was 17, and he became a boxer. And when I was younger, I really loved watching boxing. I watched it every Friday night, Saturday night fights. So I knew a little bit about boxing. I didn't do it, but I knew about it. And I knew what kind of dedication it took and how physically and mentally demanding it was. And Lackey, and I'm not sure of this, and I asked Jean, and she couldn't tell me, I think he was the division champion in his weight class in the Marine Corps. So, and he was dedicated to physical fitness all his life. All the time I knew Lackey, he went to the racket club when he was able to up until the end every single day and worked out. And that takes a great deal of commitment too. He had a double knee replacement. When was that, Gene? I couldn't remember. December of 2006, he had both knees replaced at the same time, okay? And about, I don't know what it was, maybe it was only a few days after he got out of the hospital, Gene called me and said, would you help Lackey? And I came, and there are 3 steps going up to the walk that goes to the front door, and with my help, Lackey climbed those steps without any other aid. And that, I thought that was pretty incredible. He also taught me a lot about something I had never experienced before, and that's folk art. And Lackey's passion for collecting folk art, he has an incredible collection. If you're fortunate enough to see it, it is just truly amazing. And the thing about the folk art he collected, most of the artists were poor or started out that way and black, and their art reflected their own life struggles. And it was as much about the story behind the art as it was the art itself. And so I love that part of it. In January of 2019, Lackey was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And he, very shortly after that, Gene gave us a call and said that, and asked us to be there. And so on one Sunday morning, the Rab sat there, Gene and Lackey sat there, and Alice and I sat next to them. And Lackey stood up during Joys and Sorrows and told the entire congregation that he had just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I thought that took an incredible amount of courage to do that. I can't think of many people who would be so open and sharing as he was about that. And it also says something, I think, about this congregation, that he felt comfortable doing that. So, since that diagnosis, we got closer and closer, and as he came closer to being able to, unable to go to the racket club and do the things that he always did, we spent a lot of time together. And Lackey and I shared some real passions for the 3 B's: blues, barbecue, and bourbon. And the bourbon thing got to be a you know, kind of a thing with us. But anyway, 2 or 3 times Lackey and I would get together for a boys' night out at my house, and I'd put on the music. The girls went off, and I don't know what they did, but they disappeared for the time we were there. And so we enjoyed our barbecue and our bourbon, and certainly enjoyed the blues. And when I talk about blues, I'm talking about deep Mississippi Delta blues, okay, along with gospel. And we shared a whole lot of artists with each other and just really had a lot of fun with it. When the other point, as time went on, was our choir. We usually rehearsed twice a month, and Lackey at that point couldn't be alone anymore. So I would drop Alice off at the Rowe house, and Gene and I would go off to sing in choir while Alice and Lackey sat and talked or watched MSNBC, which he had on all the time. And so we'd get home from choir, and I'd walk in and I'd say, "Hey, Lackey, it's bourbon time." And I'd go in and we'd greet each other, and then I would pour our bourbon, and we'd go in and sit and talk or watch MSNBC and talk about what was on. Often Nicole Wallace was on, and we enjoyed that. So then we'd go and have dinner and call it a night. Sometimes they came to our house. Finally, Lackey was unable to be home anymore and was put into Tori's home, and that's where he passed away. But we visited often, and I have to say, and I've gone through the dementia thing with my own mother for 8 years, so I've experienced it firsthand. Lackey was always Lackey. He was always. We'd walk in the door, and his face would just truly light up. He was always smiling. I never remember a time when he was truly down. We talked about serious things. We talked about dying, and we had some very frank conversations about that. But he was always positive. And as he got closer to the end, and Gina said this, he just got more loving. And by the end, he was, as Gene said, pure love. So it's been an honor and a privilege to know Lackey all these years. And I want to end this with something I think Lackey would appreciate. Well, I'll tell you what, I was going to save this to the end. I've got a full bottle of George Dickel out there for anybody who would like to share it. You're welcome to it. By the way, I should point out that this is Tennessee whiskey. This is not classically bourbon. For those of you who don't know, and this is I think a federal law, in order to be called bourbon, it has to come from Kentucky. And it has to follow a certain recipe, all right, and be aged at least 2 years. So this is not the top shelf stuff. This is what we drank every time we were together, and you're welcome to have as much as that bottle will hold. There's a half a gallon out there, so just remember that you have to drive home. So, to Lackey, a special friend and soul brother who enriched my life in so many ways. We're going to sing Swimming to the Other Side in just a minute, and I'm going to lead it. This was written by Pat Humphreys a number of years ago, and I think it speaks for all of us and the fact that we are all one, and I can't think of a more appropriate song to sing today, and we'll ask you to join in with us as we sing. Do the chorus, and I'll sing the first verse, and then the chorus, second verse, chorus, third verse, and finally the chorus. And the words will be up on the screen for you. Yeah, I get about 4 o'clock, right? I'm sorry. We are living in the great big dipper. We are walked by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can't resist around we walk, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live patient to receive a sign. I move forward with my senses open. Imperfection, it be my crime. In humility I will listen. We're all swimming to the other side. We are living beneath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together. Some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. On this journey through thoughts and feelings, finding intuition, my head, my heart, I'm gathering the tools together. I'm preparing to do my part. All of those who have come before me ran together and be my guide. Loving lessons that I will follow. We're all swimming to the other side. We are living beneath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together. Some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. When we get there, we'll discover all of the goodness we share have been with us since life's beginning, and we never noticed they were there. We can balance on the brink of wisdom, never knowing that we've arrived. Loving spirits will live together. We're all swimming to the other side. We are living beneath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together. Some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side.
All right. Oh, there's bourbon left. So I'm going to do a little housekeeping before we get into this.
Help yourself, Mike.
I'm not Mike, I'm Ken. That's okay. So some points of order. I'm Ken Rickard. I am Lackey's stepson. Jean is my mother. Yeah, good stuff. Jim and I have very definitely shared bourbon. The funny part is when I agreed that I would do this, the first thing I said to my wife was, would it be appropriate or not if I were to bring a bottle of Dickel onto stage and then pass it around in the audience? And she said, ordained minister that she is, she said it would be appropriate for you to take a drink of Dickel, but then you have to wait to the reception to give it to everyone else. And then yesterday I learned that Jim was going to do the same thing, so I decided not to. So that's point number one. Point number two, I am going to repeat some things that you have heard already, and I apologize, but not really. Point number three, and I think this is really important. I agreed to do this a couple of weeks ago because one of the greatest honors you can have in life, even if you are not a public speaker, especially if you are not a public speaker, is to stand up in front of other people and celebrate the life of someone you care about. It is a big deal, and do not let that opportunity pass you by. It is possible that I will lose it and cry and duck behind the podium, because that's what happened at my dad's funeral. I did it twice. So if I disappear, don't worry. That's right. Don't worry. So it is also worth noting that Jean and Lackey were married longer than my parents were, but longer than she was married to my father. So I have known that man for, what has it been, 30 years? 32 years. I've known Lackey longer than I've known my wife. I mean, it's one of those things. And my wife and I have been married for 25 years. So I'm going to tell you a few things. I did not write things out. I went note card. So we're flying by the seat of our pants. I'm going to start with a story that some people here will find hilarious, and then I will explain it to the rest of you. There are people here today who believe in providence, and I'm coming around to that. When I woke up this morning and stepped outside into this lovely North Carolina afternoon, or whatever, lovely North Carolina, yeah, we were up late last night. It was the afternoon. The first thing I heard were a bunch of birds going, beep, beep, beep. You're supposed to laugh at that. Theet, 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 thank you. One person gets the joke. Lackey had a girlfriend in college. She was not the brightest, but she was very pretty, and she would pinch him on the cheek and go, theet, 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 you so sweet. So when I heard that first thing this morning, that's what I thought of. And so I thought of Lackey first thing, which is really, really nice. As many people have said, Lackey was many things. He started off in the military. He went off to college. He was a son. He was a husband. He was a father. He was an advocate. And he was a fighter. And we want to honor all of those parts of him today. They say about some folks he contained multitudes. Oh, that man. He was an onion with layers, right? Probably a good sweet Vidalia. I live in Georgia. Good sweet Vidalia onion. I'll give him that. Most of all, he was a storyteller, if you spent any time with him. So I will try to do him a little bit of justice. We would drive around Memphis or Oxford, and he would point to things. We'd be in Memphis near the church in Germantown. He'd go, well, this all used to be dairy cow. Or, well, this used to be old Turner's farm, but now it's a Bennigan's or whatever it was. And he would tell stories about this place and what he did there and who he knew that used to live over there and where he used to go to eat the best tamales and all of that great stuff. So we had a lot of fun with that. The other piece, and Jim hit on this, his stories were funny. All of his stories were funny. One of the last things I remember talking to him about, he was telling me a story about a guy he knew back in Memphis who was just nice guy, but no good, right? Could not trust him farther than you could throw him. And this was at the end, and I asked him, I said, well, Lackey, where are we right now? He's like, oh, we're here in Memphis. And that was sweet. But more than they were funny, they were windows into his life. And I think the interesting thing is that his life and my life are very, very different. Again, I did not grow up with the man. I didn't meet him at 32. I didn't meet him until I was 24. That's important. I grew up in Massachusetts and then moved to Arkansas. I was 13, my brother was 15. This is a man who grew up in rural Mississippi and then Memphis. Okay, so we're coming from a little bit different places. But he always had stories. The Mammy Coo story. That was a good, I remembered that. I was like, oh yeah, I remember Mammy Coo. I remember those. I heard all those stories. And I think it might have been the stories that attracted Gene to him in the first place. Now, we haven't discussed this, so we'll talk later. But it is also worth noting that the rest of the family were skeptical. She told me a couple of weeks ago, her parents' thought was, you're saying it's an unemployed civil rights lawyer from Mississippi? And you're going to marry this boy? Her parents were good, solid farm folks from Illinois. Well, they're actually generations off the farm. But anyway, so there was some skepticism. And we'll get back to that a little bit. But those stories, they were so good. I will say he doted on his mother, Helen. There were some pictures of Helen earlier. Just doted on her. His father... all I know about his father is that he was, I wrote this down, a salesman, a philanderer, and a liar. Now, I mentioned that. I thought about why would I mention that. Lackey was, in my estimation, slow to trust, yet he was the most loving and loyal of souls. Once you got through that first layer of the onion. The first layer, of course, was learning that you didn't call him by his given name. Does anyone know his given name? Because yes, his name is Lester. I could not understand why anyone would want to be called Lackey until I learned that his name was Lester. And that's okay, right? The other thing that I think is worth talking about is that we had conflicts. I was sitting next to my mother while Jim was speaking, and she said, "Oh yeah, we used to fight." And they would have arguments. He was the most tolerant person to a point, and there were lines that you did not cross. Now, the challenging thing when you're a 24-year-old northerner living in the South whose mother has just married a Southern gentleman is knowing where those lines are. Now, a lot of you probably know Lackey was a famous letter writer. All of you who live here saw his letters in the paper. How many of you ever received a Lackey letter? How many of you have ever received an angry Lackey letter? Yeah. There was a time, and this is kind of why I mentioned he doted on his mother, Helen. He sent me a letter, the basic premise of which was, "You have disrespected your mother, and that is not acceptable." I don't know what I had done. Well, actually, that's not true. At the time, I don't know what I had done. But he sent me like an 8-point list of things that I and my brother had done wrong in his presence. And this was after they'd been married for a year. Now, there are many things that we can do in response to such a letter. We can get angry, which is pretty common. I'll get back to that in a second. So I thought for a couple of days, and I wrote him a letter back, and I said, "Sir, I am terribly sorry. I did not grow up in your house. I am not from Mississippi. You have many unwritten rules that I am not aware of. You have lines that I have obviously crossed without knowing, and they have deeply offended you, and I am sorry. Please, the next time I see you, let me know what the rules of your house are." I'll give you one example. I wasn't allowed to watch hockey games on his TV. He did. Stanley Cup was on. My wife and I always watch the Stanley Cup. Not in Memphis. Nope. So I think it's really important to note that early on in our relationship, I had committed the unforgivable sin of disrespecting my mother, his wife. And we got through it. That is really valuable. And our relationship came out stronger and more trusting. Again, that was 30 years ago. And really what I learned in that conflict is grace. Lackey taught us a lot of things. Some of them are funny. He taught me how to eat collard greens properly. The answer is vinegar. You talk about lines to cross. If you put sugar on my collard greens, I'm coming after you, because that is not right. I didn't know what a meat and three was. I learned about a meat and three and collard greens on the same day. But honestly, grace, the idea of forgiveness, the idea of reconciliation, these were things that he spent his life fighting for and practicing. And so, again, when you get the opportunity to give us a talk like this, you can reflect, oh yeah, the experiences that I had were probably just like those he had with everybody else, because he was that kind of person. And so I leave you with that, because with his grace, we were all blessed. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Okay. So as part of all of this, yeah, I can tell them what they are. You can too, because you did prepare it.
Oh, didn't know that. Might not have volunteered to get up. Anywho, I'm Amy. I'm Ken's wife, Gene's daughter-in-law, Lackey's daughter-in-law. These are memories of Lackey's, his obituaries in the front, and then everything else is stuff that Lackey wrote. And I just wanted y'all to have a chance to read these things. In particular, you should read it all, but If you turn to the middle, you get to the section titled Grenada, where Lackey wrote an account of that time he got thrown in jail for contempt by the white judge that didn't really like the fact that you Yankee, and he's like, no, I'm from Mississippi, so you got that part wrong. Judge couldn't comprehend a Mississippi boy wanting to defend the African American folks for protesting for their rights. When I read that last fall, I said, when Lackey passes, I want to hand this out at his memorial. People need to read this story. People need to hear this story in his words. So these are available. We passed a lot out, but we've got some more. Thanks.
Again, you may remain seated for our next hymn, This Little Light of Mine. I invite you into this time of prayer. We give thanks for Lackey, whom we remember and whose life we celebrated today, for all the ways in which his life touched ours, for the difficult as well as the good times, for the ways in which his love continues to be with us. In thanksgiving, we will remember him. As we mark this time of release, we trust that beyond absence there is presence, that beyond the pain there can be healing, and that beyond the silence there may be sensing, that beyond the loss there may be understanding, that through understanding there is love. We pray for ourselves and for Lackey. Fare thee well, Lackey. Blessings on you and on all of us who knew you. Amen. Our closing is a poem by Rossiter Worthington Raymond. Life is eternal. Love is immortal. Death is only a horizon. And a horizon is nothing save the limit of our sight. No eulogy can fully convey all that was Lackey's life. No stone monument will epitomize who he was. No tribute is ever going to capture his spirit in full. No history will do him justice. Only you can do right by him. And you can do so only by sharing your memories and your stories, and most importantly, by living so that others will remember the best of him in how you go about your life. No higher tribute can any human being receive. Blessings on all.